welcome back. We are going to do a quick analysis of triumph in the face of adversity. Enjoy. As always, a quick summary. The story starts with a flashback of the protagonist, the main character, to Lucille, where she stands at her mother's graveside and she thinks back on her life. She tells the sad story of her father's marriage to her mother. The grandmother did not approve of the marriage at all. She treated her mother like a slave. Didn't matter how hard she worked. Her mother-in-law did not appreciate her or her work. Eventually, the suffering leads to her mother and father moving out of her grandmother's house to a squatter camp. This was supposed to be a temporary move, but unfortunately, her father loses his work and then it turns into an indefinite stay. He is also a drunk. The narrator then works very hard to turn her situation around. She starts selling some sweets. She gets help from friends and neighbors. Eventually, she gets employed as a TV presenter and she can afford to buy a house. But she only moves into the house, buys the house later because her parents refused to sign for her. She was still a minor. Her father dies, and only then, at last, her mother allows her to move her into her house with her and her siblings. But sadly, her mother is too weak to survive. She dies. The title. There's always a question about the significance of the title. So the title, Triumph in the Face of Adversity, is a suitable title. The long list of incidents faced by the narrator, her mother, her family, it doesn't stop the narrator from reaching her goals, being triumphant, her goal of making her own money and improving her and her siblings' life. She wished to improve her mother's life as well, but her mother was too loyal to her father. She still succeeds in getting a better life for her and her siblings. So she is triumphant in the face of adversity. The themes. This story, because it is such a long story, it has quite the list of themes, but everything is actually so interwoven that it doesn't really matter which theme you get asked. As long as you know your work and as long as you know your themes, you will be able to answer this question. The first theme is the theme of prejudice or intolerance. Lucille's grandmother does not approve of her son marrying a girl from Johannesburg or Igoli. She has nothing against Thembekile as such, but she despises her because of where she comes from. Madlamini wants her son to marry someone who grew up in Natal, currently known, obviously, as KwaZulu-Natal. Then we have the theme of mother-in-law and Makoti conflict. Madlamini continues to torture Thembekile even after she gets married to her father. Obviously the narrator's father, not Thembekile's father. She makes her wake up earlier than everyone. She's not allowed to wear trousers or short skirts, and she must cover her head at all times. The theme of conflict. Now, the life of Phambili squatter camp is characterized by tin shanties, commune toilets, overpopulation, and poverty. The narrator's household also suffers when the father loses his job and cannot provide food and other necessities. It is because of poverty that the narrator's family stays in the squatter camp. Remember, her father lost his job longer than it had been planned. It was supposed to be a temporary home. And that leads to the theme of unemployment. Lucille's father loses his job, and no matter how much he looks, he cannot find new work. It seems, actually, that most people in Phambili squatter camp are also unemployed. So there's a lot of poverty. As many of your short stories in this cycle, gender-based violence is one of the themes. The father finds an escape in liquor. He's lost his job, and this is the sad story of ages. As soon as men feel useless, unimportant, as if they are not carrying their weight to escape, they drown themselves in liquor. When he is drunk, he beats up her mother for no apparent reason. And then he also turns to the little children. When Bongani and Zanele are born, their father beats them up for no apparent reason. Thuli works hard, but her father steals her money, uses it to buy alcohol. He even goes to her employer and takes part of her salary without her consent. Cannot imagine why her employer gave her father the money, but he did. than child labor, obviously, because Tulisile, who is literally a child, is forced to go and find employment in order to feed the family. She sells sweets, eventually gets employed by Mr. Ratebe, who owns a fish and chips shop. At 15, she works as a cleaner after school and on weekends. The theme of loyalty. At the beginning, Jabulani stays loyal to Thembekile by loving her, marrying her despite his mother's disapproval of her. Later, she refuses to leave her husband even though he abuses her. She stays loyal to him despite several attempts by her parents to make her leave the abusive marriage. Instead, she stops visiting her parents. She also continues to stay loyal by not standing up to her husband when he steals her daughter's money. She doesn't want to sign the documents that needed to be signed when Tulisile wanted to buy a house. She even stays behind when her daughter offers her the opportunity to move into a better house, all because of her loyalty to her husband. Now you have to decide whether this was a wise loyalty that she exhibited here by staying with her husband, not speaking up when gross abuse happened. Actually, he committed a felony by stealing his daughter's money, not only in his house, but also from the employer. So you have to decide whether she was wise in doing this. The theme of fear. Thembekile stays in constant fear from the moment she's introduced to the family as a young bride because of her mother-in-law. And later, when she's abused by her husband, she fears even to protect her children when their father beats them. And this begs the question, is it loyalty or is it fear that makes her stay? Ambition. Tulisile is an ambitious young girl who has a drive to be successful. Now we will look at the role that her teacher plays in this just now. No matter how many times her attempts fail, she keeps on trying until she is successful and she manages to have a proper house. How is the story told? This is what many teachers call the narrative arc. It starts with the exposition, it goes down to the denouement or the resolution, but we start with the setting. Now, when they ask the setting, you have to mention time and place. Sometimes the question counts 1 mark. You'll see when you look at the video on the questions. Then you only need to mention the physical place, the location. But I would not take chances with this. I would always mention time and place. Now, the time depends on which extract you get in your question paper. So the setting of the story is South Africa, Johannesburg. It further develops to Pambile squatter camp, where the family then spends most of their time. Now the structure and the plot development. First we have the exposition, which is the introduction. Tulisile stands by her mother's grave and she thinks back on how much her mother's death affected her emotionally. She starts comparing the pain she felt when her mother died compared to the pain she felt when her father had died. The rising action. She takes us through the beginning of her mother's suffering at the hands of her grandmother. Madlamini does not approve of Thembekile becoming Jabulani's wife because she's from Johannesburg. Remember, we just said it in the summary, and not from Natal, KwaZulu-Natal. The suffering escalates further when the narrator's parents moved to Pambile squatter camp. Her mother thought her life was going to be better because she was going to be out from the control of her mother-in-law. Then life just turns worse. The narrator's father loses his job, drowns his sorrow in liquor, becomes abusive to his wife and children. The climax of the story is where the narrator's ambition of becoming a better person is fulfilled when she gets employed as a TV presenter for a children's program. Her work enables her to afford a house, to move her family out of the squatter camp, but her mother and father stay behind because of her mother's loyalty. The resolution is where at last, after her father's death, she manages to move her mother into a house with her and her siblings. Unfortunately, her mother's health has deteriorated to such an extent that she dies soon after. Characterization. Tulisile. Tulisile is the narrator, the protagonist, and the main character in the story. She's the eldest of 3 children. Her parents got married after she was born. She witnesses her mother being verbally abused by Madlamini, the narrator's paternal grandmother. She witnesses her mother being physically abused by Jabulani, her father. And she also witnesses her father beating her siblings. Then, because of her father losing his job and becoming a drunk, she experiences hardship and poverty as her family and their neighbors suffer in the squatter camp. She attempts to earn money to feed her family. Also, she gets food from a friend at school so that her siblings can have some food. She borrows 30 rands from her maternal grandmother, the one that her mother stopped seeing because they begged her to leave her father, in order to start her business of selling sweets. She gets into an argument with her father after he has stolen her savings to buy liquor. She gets part-time employment at Mr. Ratebe's fish and chip shop. After her father steals her money there as well, at last her friend encourages her to apply to a TV station as a presenter for a children's program. Then at last she can afford to buy a proper house, move out of the squatter camp. But her plans are delayed by her being underage and her parents refusing to sign. She only manages to buy a house later when she comes of age. She doesn't cry much when her father dies. This is the comparison that she starts off with at the beginning of the story in the exposition, but she does cry more when her mother dies. Thembekile, Tulisile's mother, Jabulani's wife. She is given rules by her mother-in-law when she marries Jabulani. She's forced to wake up early, work in the house throughout each day. She at last convinces her husband to move them to a squatter camp temporarily, thinking this would improve her life. She suffers abuse in the form of beatings by her husband, but she stays loyal to her marriage, doesn't want to leave her husband despite the abuse, the age-old story of abused women who stay loyal to their abusers. She takes her husband's side against her own parents. She doesn't fight back. She only joins her children in a proper house after her husband has died, but by then she's so ill that she also dies. Madlamini, the grandmother, the mother-in-law, she's the narrator's grandmother, Jabulani's mother. She doesn't approve of his marriage to Thembekile, and she makes rules for Thembekile when they are married. She treats her like a slave in the household. Jabulani, her father, marries Thembekile despite his mother's disapproval. He loses his job. He drowns his sorrow in getting drunk. He beats up his wife for no particular reason. And then he also emotionally and physically abuses his children. Ntombi is the narrator's friend from the squatter camp, and she's badly burned when their shack catches fire. She survives, but some family member takes her away to stay with them, and then Tulisile is without her best friend. But then fortunately there's also Ntabiseng. She's her friend from school. She brings lunch to share with Tuli, and then usually she takes that lunch to her siblings. She assists Tuli to get her employment at the TV station. She's a great friend. When Tulisile was scared of applying for the job, and she had all kinds of excuses, not having a phone, how they're going to get into contact with her, she was the one who said, this is not an excuse. We will give them our number and we will let you know when they contact her. So a really good friend. Bongani is Tulisile's younger brother. He suffers severe beatings from his father, and then when she buys a house, he moves with her to her new house. Her sister Zanele also suffers beatings from her father, and she also moves to the new house with the narrator. Mr. Nkwane is the narrator's teacher. He realizes that she's not doing well in her studies, and he tries to talk with her, but their talk leads to the narrator stopping school for a short while because she misunderstands what Mr. Nkwane intends with this talk. In the September exams, there was a question about this where the answer was that Mr. Nkwane was unsympathetic towards the narrator. I do not agree with that. I think he knew exactly what he was doing. He was challenging her to rise above her situation. That is the catalyst that makes her go to her grandmother. Remember, sometimes people will wallow in self-pity until they are shocked out of it. And I think Mr. Nkwane actually wanted to challenge her to do something about her situation. He knew she was not going to accept any help. She was too proud and too ashamed of her life at that stage. But he knew she was strong enough to do something about this if she could only be challenged. Mr. Ratebe owns the fish and chip shop, and he employs her to do cleaning during weekends and after school. He gives a part of her salary to her father when he comes asking for it without even telling to Lucille about it. She only finds out about it at the end of the month when she gets paid her salary. Me Sedike is the old lady who has the beautiful house that Tuli goes to ask for bread. She asks Tulisili into her house, and then she asks for her story. Tuli tells her the story. She gives her bread to share with her family, but she advises Tuli to speak with a social worker or the police. The narrator's point of view. The story is narrated from first person point of view. In other words, the narrator tells us the story of her mother's suffering from her perspective, Tuli's perspective. The plot develops with her telling of the story, while at the same time she is fully involved because she's a character in the story. Her suffering and experience are told from a first-hand experience. The style. The story is told using an informal register, which is suited for a young girl without any education. She's very young when the story starts. The use of direct speech seeks to capture the actions and attitude of the different characters the narrator comes across in her life. The author uses a number of isiZulu phrases which emphasize the background of most characters in the story, and obviously my pronunciation of many of these phrases are sorely lacking. Diction and figurative language. The writer uses figurative language in order to emphasize meaning. There are a few idiomatic expressions like please fell onto deaf ears. The mother was used as a punch bag depending on the mood. Tuli, who says I had to swallow my pride, and when she's told make sure that you rise above the odds. There are a few metaphors, and when you have to explain a metaphor, you have to explain what is being compared to what and why, and that will give you the full marks. The empty life she had led. We are going to discuss some of these metaphors in the next video on the questions of triumph in the face of adversity. She says, my father was a complete monster. Obviously, he was not a monster with horns and red eyes and terrible teeth, but he acted like a real monster. So her father's behavior was compared to the behavior of a monster, which is inhuman, cruel, because he abuses them. The evening deepened in the avenue. The evening cannot deepen. It stays on the same level, but because it becomes darker and later, she compares the progression of time and the growing darkness to deepening. She says she would be next on his list. He doesn't have a list. He just comes and starts abusing them. But when he's done with her mother, she will now be next. She says we were trapped in poverty and constant abuse. They were not literally trapped. They were not tied to something that is visible poverty or visible abuse, but it is as if they are trapped, they are tied in this situation, constant abuse and poverty that is inescapable because her father doesn't have a job. She says, I could hear a tint of sadness in her voice. A tint is a color that you literally see. She cannot see the sadness, but she could hear it. I said, choking on my tears. She is not choking, but it is as if she cannot find her voice because it feels as if she cannot breathe. It feels as if she cannot use her vocal cords while she's crying. Her dreams were shattered. Obviously, it's not visible dreams that were shattered, but it's as if the shards are lying there because this dream that was so beautiful is now broken. Constantly scratching in the shack. He's not scratching, but he's searching. She was swept from the life of poverty. She wasn't literally swept, but it felt like it. The dark cloud hanging around us, not a literal dark cloud. It felt as if a cloud was hanging over them because there was darkness. Also, there's use of personification. The rules were awaiting her. The rules couldn't wait, but it's as if they were waiting. This is now for her mother. The sadness in their eyes tormented her. The sadness cannot torment because it's not a person, but it's as if they were. She says, my dream of having my own business had not died. A dream cannot literally die, but it was kept alive. It's personification. Bury the past and open a door to the future. The past cannot be put into a grave, but you can put it behind you. Tone and mood is going to depend on the extract that you receive to discuss. So in general, the tone of the story is depressed because at the beginning of the story, her mother's ordeal, her own ordeal, these are terrible experiences for anybody to go through. Then when Madlamini speaks, she uses a very mean tone. She disapproves. She continues using the same tone even when the couple is married. Also a defensive tone that Tembekile uses when she defends her husband's behavior, abusing her. The mood, depending on the extract that you get, could be sad, emotional, optimistic. And there you go. This wraps up the discussion of triumph in the face of adversity. Watch the next video that is going to discuss a few questions that have been asked in the past. See you there.